So you have called the modern American family a failed experiment.
If you try to design something that really was important and it had close to a 50% failure rate, I think most of us would agree there's something fundamentally wrong with the design.
What does it mean to actually start viewing kids and your children as assets?
It's not hard to see how kids become assets if that's the way you think of life, right?
Why do you think it is that men seem to struggle putting that same kind of work energy into the family that they're building?
Because we've decided that the family is a maternal entity.
Jeremy, you talk about a 100-year vision for your family.
So vision is all about like seeing a new future. Like, where are we headed?
So you have called the modern American family a failed experiment.
Yeah.
What do you mean by that?
Yeah. Well, if you look, and it was interesting, I was just listening to a podcast where there's this famous divorce lawyer, James Sexton, and he was debating with a Christian about marriage, and he just said, God must hate marriage. That was his kind of statement, because he just says it fails so predictably, so often. And and so one of the questions we have to grapple with is any kind of, if you try to design something that really was important and it had close to a 50% failure rate, I think most of us would agree there's something fundamentally wrong with the design, right? And so who's at fault for that, right? Is God at fault? And this is what this lawyer was saying. It's God's fault. Like, God invented this thing called marriage, and it fails constantly. And even if you look at 50% of marriages that continue to last, how many of those are really successful marriages? So you have to decide, where do you come down on this? Everyone knows that family and marriage is in crisis, but is it endemic to the design itself? And so I think that it's better to understand that the real flaw is in the way that we are perceiving marriage or family. We have attempted an experimental version of family and marriage, and it's not working. But instead of taking a step back, we just double down. Like, two examples, I think, to me, that are really clear that this is an experiment. So in India, um, you know, currently the most populous nation in the world, what do you think the divorce rate is? Just, if you're like, everybody's listening to this, just trying to think about what it might be. So the divorce rate in India today is 1.1%. So if you were to ask them if family and marriage is a failed experiment, they would be, what are you talking about? Like, it succeeds 99% of the time in their culture. Now, there's all kinds of things you could say. You could critique kind of Indian marriage, Indian culture, but that's historically and geographically normal for marriage. That's not some kind of weird aberration. We are the aberration, and we are the ones exporting to the world how to do marriage and family. And we are sitting on a failed experiment. Another statistic is that the United States is now the country in the world with the most single parent households. We exist on ground zero. Of the 170 nations in the world, we're the worst. We're the last ones who should be telling anyone how to do marriage and family. And that's the reason why the only people that I trust that talk about marriage and family are more cultural archaeologists going to other cultures and rediscovering ancient ways of doing family, and trying to get us back to the original design. And there are people that are doing that. And that's certainly what we do. But I would say the vast majority of counselors, of ministries, what we're doing is we're trying to continue to build on top of this flawed foundation. And we're just kind of calling a stop to it. Say, guys, stop. Like, we do not know what we're doing. We have got to go back to a better way of doing this. There are very, very functional designs for family and marriage. We do not happen to be using one of them. And so in that sense, I totally agree with the divorce lawyer. Like, yeah, this is flawed.
Where did it go wrong? What did we experiment with?
Everywhere in the world, in virtually every civilization or culture that really championed monogamous marriage throughout history, saw family as a interdependent team that worked together. So the husband and wife were forming this team, and they were and their children, and they were part of a multi-generational family team. This was so you look at, like I said, any culture, any ancient culture that really championed monogamous marriage, this was the design, and it makes complete sense. Like you get a certain amount of input and identity and resources from upstream generations. You expand those resources. You make a dynamic alliance with a husband or wife. You continue to expand that. You have children. You pour into them. You live as an interdependent team for life, and that's the way that family has always been. And we call it like a multi-generational team, right? That's the model of family historically. We're about 150 years into a completely different design for family, which I think of as a springboard for individual success. That's the way that Western families think. So ancient families were always a team. They were an economic team. They were a religious team. They were a multi-generational team. That's the way that family was designed to be. And they were this family was sort of the unit through which you lived your whole life. And again, it's something you do multi-generationally. We don't do that today. We hit the reset button every single generation. And our goal to build a healthy family, we think about it primarily from the metaphor of the nest. We are trying to launch people out, the next generation out, and see and help them be successful as individuals. We're not really trying to be an interdependent team. Even from the time our kids turn 5 or 6 years old, we're already pushing them out of the nest into peer-oriented environments. And the husband and wife typically aren't working together. The kids certainly have no anticipation of working with their parents as they get older. The parents aren't working with their parents in any kind of interdependent way. Like like 98% of the time, we are living our lives outside of that family as individuals primarily, and that's considered healthy. That's considered normal. And I'm here to say that that is unhealthy and totally abnormal historically. And so we're trying something brand new. And a lot of people, when sociologists, when they study this, they're like, this probably really started around the industrial revolution,
Hmm.
when family used to be totally integrated as a part of work. Work and family were an integrated whole. At the turn from the 19th to 20th century, 70% of Americans lived on small farms. Most of the people who didn't lived in small towns and were primarily working in trades, and they were working together as families. There was a dramatic shift that occurred where we disentangled work from family. And so in order to get people to become sort of cogs in sort of corporate machines where they can hyper specialize and then use that specialization in the larger economy as individuals, we atomized the family into its pieces, and we trained people to make an identity out of those particular um, uh, work-based identities as more fundamental than their family identity. And this actually, I think, was a wonderful thing for the economy. I mean, this you wanna build an economy, break up all the pieces, and then rebuild it based on the individuals. It's a powerful move. It
Hmm.
was horrible for the family. And again, we're not really talking about it in these terms. We're not sort of people who have realized that we're at the tail end of a really novel experiment. We act as if this is just what family is. We don't say, "Oh, this is whoa, you wait, explain to me what you're doing." So you're saying like all your kids are going to go do their own thing, and then you don't even work with your husband or wife? Whoa, how's that? Does that work? Like we don't talk like that, right? We don't realize that we're doing something hyper experimental and very novel. And again, I don't have any problem with doing things that are hyper experimental and novel. I'm an entrepreneur. I love trying new things. But when you try new things, there does come a point. Any good scientist will tell you, as eventually you need to collect the data and see if your hypothesis worked out. We've never done that with regards to this kind of family. We've never taken a step back. And of course, it would take 5 seconds to look at the data and say, "Whoa, this isn't working, guys. This is a terrible idea. This has been terrible for men, terrible for women, terrible for grandparents, terrible for children, sons and daughters, horrible for societies, but really dynamic for economies. It's actually been a blessing to certain individuals. There have been positive, like things that have happened or come out of this experiment. They just haven't been positive for the family. They've been vastly negative for the family. And because we don't really care about the family, we really care about the individual. We're always kind of running the data against that question alone, and not even. using as part of the evaluation the impact that destroyed families have on individuals. We're simply asking, okay, as an individual, what do you want? And of course, we're assuming all of the values of modern Western individualism and hiding from every person this sort of historic reality that we used to live in and these extended multi-generational family teams. So anyway, I'm here to say, and part of what I do is I just like, hey guys, it's a free country still. You don't have to do this. You don't have to keep trying this experiment. You can. You're free to do that. But I do think that we should probably raise the flag at some point and say, hey, there is an ancient way of doing family that's actually really amazing. It works really well. You can do it in a modern world just as well as you could do it in the ancient world. But I would say 99% of people today, they don't even know that this option exists because it all happened before they were born. Most of these shifts happened over 100 years ago, and so they've only ever lived in this version of the family, this sort of nest version, this springboard for individual success. And so I just think, hey guys, like let's at least consider this highly functional, highly relational, ancient family team idea. And if you want to try it, like then come along with us. If you want to continue to attempt the nest hyper individual springboard for individual success version of family, you're welcome to do that. But we've got to get the word out that this is not the only way to do family.
It's so striking when you talk about what's normal now. And like you said, when you actually compare that against the data and you say over half of marriages failing, explosion in fatherless homes. Talking about this, how has the perception of children changed over time
Mm.
with society?
Yeah.
And with fathers in general, I would say too.
Yeah. Yeah, so children were considered a blessing within the family team idea. Every child coming into the family, it was, if you could imagine, probably the best way to maybe picture this as a Western person is if you were coaching a team and all of a sudden somebody transferred, into your school that had a whole new talent stack that they could come onto your team. And let's say you just didn't have enough players, you didn't have the right talent, you just would be so excited, "Wow, look, guys," like, and all the other team players would be super excited, like, "Look what we've got. We've got a new teammate. Like, this is amazing." That's the way that people perceived children in ancient times. They saw them as because they were living their life as a family team, every single time a woman gave birth to a new child in the family, she was a hero. The child was like treasured. It was so exciting to see what they were going to bring to the team. They also represented a economic the best pathway towards scalability for the economies of the family, for the defense of the family. I mean, everything that the family wanted to be and everything the family wanted to experience really hinged on having and raising children. So everybody was united, that this was always a blessing. Today, yeah, you can't imagine how almost entirely opposite the way that people perceive the coming of children. And so they're always seen as somehow a liability. I was going for my first business loan, and we owned just about almost nothing as a family, and so we were filling out our financial statement. When I was newly married, we just had a couple little kids, and I was asking. We were kind of filling this out, and I asked the banker. I said, "Well, we have a couple of kids," and he said, "Actually," we were like filling out the asset whole part of the column. He's like, "Actually, they're liabilities." We all had a good laugh, but that's the difference. If you think that family is a team, children are an asset, and they're the best asset you could possibly ever you could ever acquire. If you think that you are primarily a family is a springboard for individual success, every child that comes into the family, you have to slice the fixed pie up into smaller and smaller pieces, so they're always a liability. You're not expecting your kids to help you when you get older. You're not expected to work with your kids as they become adults. You're not expecting to even potentially even live in proximity with your adult children. It's all a drain until they leave, in terms of on your resources, on your time. And so it becomes sort of it's really children today in the Western world are starting to slide into, I would say, the category of hobby. Like if you're the kind of person who is like a kid person, I was just listening to a video and a feminist was saying, some people are really into, um, elementary education, and those are the kinds of people who have children. I was like, I mean, I'm not into elementary education at all. And I absolutely love having and raising kids, not because that's my hobby. It's because it's actually core to everything that we're trying to do as a family. But I realized that what she was saying was completely consistent with the way that kids are being perceived. And this is the reason why people are like, well, do you want to have a dog? You want to have a kid? You want to just like be single? Like these are all lifestyle choices. The same way that you would say you want to play golf, you want to play pickleball, like, what's your so people are asking themselves, they're kinda like, "What are my preferences? And what would I like?" And, of course, if you're making that decision, I'm not sure if kids do make much sense because at some level, it's like, "Okay, I'm going to have a child, and they're going to be an enormous drain on my resources, enormous drain on my time for decades, and I can't get out of it at all." It seems like the case that would have to be made to take on a responsibility and a risk because just the time, involved in that kind of a commitment. It's sort of like joining a hobby in which you can't get out for 20 years, no matter how frustrating it gets. That doesn't seem like a good hobby to get involved with when there's 1,000 other choices. And this is the way I think a lot of people perceive having children today.
I find that a lot of people, they'll joke about the drain that kids are, and of course, there's a lot of responsibility that comes with parenting, fathering and mothering a child. But they would probably still acknowledge that, hey, kids are a blessing. They might still use that term, but hey, yeah, it's a blessing. Like I love my child. But what you're hitting at, it seems it's just intrinsic as a part of who we are in modern America, where even though we might say they're a blessing and we love our kids and we wouldn't change anything. Like nobody would say I wouldn't want my kids. Most people wouldn't. We still fundamentally view them as liabilities versus assets. So walk me through a little bit more, like, what does it mean to actually start viewing kids and your children as assets?
So I think it starts by actually framing your own identity differently. So in ancient times, you wouldn't primarily think of yourself as an individual. You would see yourself as a part of a multi-generational family line. And so as a part of that larger team, that huge project, it's not hard to see how kids become assets if that's the way you think of life, right? If basically if you were a part of a, like I said, a team or a corporation that had existed for hundreds of years, and the only way that that corporation or team would expand and be healthy and thrive is through having and raising children. This is what we were. You can't just go out and get new ones. You can't just hire people. Like it's this is what this is. You have to be a part of the family. Then the only way to grow, the only way to expand, the only way to continue is through having children. And so this really gets at a fundamental identity question. If you saw yourself as a part of that thing, and you saw that the primary thing I'm doing when I'm going to work is to fuel that. Like I am a part of or I am leading a multi-generational family team. Children, again, become incredibly strategic if that's your identity. But if your identity is as an individual and you're going to be just fine, and your expectation is when we have kids, the best thing that you possibly can do is launch them out into a totally independent individual existence. And that if they don't need you at all and you don't need them at all, then that's the pinnacle of success. Then anything like that, of course, kids will always be a liability within that calculation. So I think that's the key differentiator. And so it's hard for people to even imagine a world in which you're interdependent for life as a family, because we've separated from our own parents that way. Like our parents don't need us; they have Social Security. We've taken all of the responsibilities that used to exist inside of the family, and this was just a matter of survival. I mean, if you kicked your kids out at 18 in most cultures, that was a death sentence for your children. Like, that would be a terrible idea. Slavery probably would be the best case scenario for somebody in that situation. Whereas in our culture, it's like, that's just standard practice. Like, they're not gonna starve, they're gonna get a job, they're gonna hopefully get educated, they're gonna figure it out. There's a government that can give them loans and there's always, like, different ways the government can backstop, healthcare issues, and the government will protect them, and so all of these things that used to exist, that only were given to an individual if they were a fully present and contributing member of a family team, you get just because you're a part of a country. The government or the state provides 80-90% of what the family used to provide. And so this is another movement that has changed everything the way we perceive family. And so family becomes completely um, like something that like arbitrary, whether or not you need it or you want to be a part of it or not. So, but it's so if you think about it that way, yeah, kids would be tremendous asset, and not only like positive in terms of like meaning or whatever the things that we think of today as would make up why somebody might want to have children. They were a necessity for most of history. Like if you screwed up parenting, if you didn't develop an emotional connection to your children so that there was a culture of honor in your family that they would want to care for you when you got old, sick and old, and then you and your spouse would potentially be um, you would look at the end of your life and you would say, this is a matter of survival for us as well. And so we took all of that away and we consider all of that a blessing. It's just like, it's amazing. We don't have to worry about those things anymore. It's amazing the government can just take care of all those needs for us. And we don't count the other side of that equation. I think there are good things. I mean, I am glad there are safety nets for people. The problem is that we've made these safety nets entitlements even if you have a strong family. And so now, because those exist, we don't realize that we de-incentivize people from building strong families. And this de-incentivization, I think, has led to enormous amounts of neglect of children, enormous amount of self-centeredness of adults, and if we keep going the trajectory, demographers are saying there won't even be a future. I mean, you're seeing an 100% of developed countries are now below fertility rate, except for Israel. Israel is the only exception, the only country in the developed world that has an above replacement fertility rate. And so this trajectory actually isn't even sustainable. It takes currently 100 South Koreans to make 4 great grandchildren. I mean, the amount of cultures that will disappear and cease to exist. The amount of economic catastrophe that's going to come upon so many of these developed nations who have denigrated family life and turned it into this hobby. Um, so it didn't. It was a very short sighted sort of transition that could work for a couple hundred years if you have enormous wealth. A few generations can enjoy all of the proceeds from what took thousands of generations to create, and then add and leave nothing for the future, and we've essentially done that, in every developed country, and our great-grandchildren will, unless something dramatic is to shift, they're gonna grow up in a quite apocalyptic situation, and so this is not working. It's not so you can look at the micro elements of why it's not working for us, like in a short term, how much divorce there is, how much loneliness there is, how much anxiety and depression there is, how much loss of meaning there is, all of the things that we're beginning to see around the edges. But there are actually really serious material problems that we haven't yet even begun to experience that are coming because of this shift. So again, a failed experiment. It didn't work. We should be talking nonstop about this problem, but most people are more content to continue to enjoy what they can while they can during their life and leave nothing for future generations.
It's fascinating how people are starting to pick up on the dem demography of, what's going on with, population collapse. Elon Musk is raising that, and to millions of people on Twitter, so people are waking up to that. So, it's like people are recognizing the symptoms of what's going on, but it's like, what is the root cause? And how do we go back
Yeah.
to kinda solving this root cause? Because we fundamentally shifted our view on family and children.
Yes.
Let me ask you this, men in particular, men seem to have no problem pouring lots of creative and strategic energy into their work, into building our careers, building our businesses. Why do you think it is that men seem to struggle putting that same kind of work energy into the family that they're building?
Because we've decided that the family is a maternal entity. It doesn't really resonate with men unless you are a highly nurturing man. Again, we think it's a nest. Like, I don't know how many men want to spend their time investing in in a nest, but that's a highly maternal. It's a sort of a nurturing environment. Even when you talk to fathers today and try to talk about what it means to be a good father. Today, the primary ways that we try to encourage fathers to be better fathers is really telling them to become mothers. Like, you need to really be present with your kids. You need to really dial into their feelings. You need to like nurture your kids because that's all the family is anymore. It's just a nest for nurturing until the chickies get mature enough to fly away. Historically, the father was the one most interested in the family because it was more like a team or an army. Like it needed a visionary leader. The survival of the family depended on visionary leadership. This was the historic way the family was designed. And so everyone would rally around the patriarch, not because of patriarchy, because he got all of his preferences made. It's because all of our survival was dependent on the success of the team as a whole. And every team, whether you're a corporation or you're a sports team, is highly dependent on visionary leadership. We know this in every other area of life, but because we don't think of family as a team, we're like, well, it doesn't need a visionary leader. What does it need? It needs 2 moms. That's really what it needs. And so you wonder why dads are like, "I don't know if I wanna sign up for that." I mean, I get to go to work and be a visionary leader. Maybe when I coach my kids' little league team, I'll get to be a visionary leader there. I can go to church and be a visionary leader there. I go home and I've gotta be a second mom. No, I don't wanna do that. I'm not built for that. I'm not interested in doing that. And again, I think there are men who feel maybe like they would enjoy that, but they're a small percentage. And this is the problem. So you have to go all the way back and say, do you want to build your family to be a team? If you want to be a multi-generational team, that team is going to need a visionary leader. And I've seen once men make the decision to actually change their family from being a nest that nurtures chickies to being a team that is actually trying to hold and take and expand territory. They go from basically having very little interest in family to, wow, this is the most important thing. I All of my skills make sense as a man. Like everything that guy has placed in me, as a man, I can see why I am needed in the family. But in the typical modern Western family, you've got the mother to do the nurturing, you have the state to do the protection, the provision, and dads are like, I am optional and I don't enjoy it. And that's why dads today don't engage well with families.
And I see that, especially with my generation, with the millennial generation, that trend of there's been this recognition that, oh, we need to be present.
Yes.
We need work life balance. We need to be present with our family. We're present with our kids. But that concept of the distinction between mothering and fathering and that ability to actually bring vision to your family. Jeremy, you talk about a 100-year vision for your family. Can you
Yeah.
tell me what does that look like?
So vision is all about like seeing like a new future. Like where are we headed? And so I'm constantly trying to understand what is it. So I've got 5 kids, 3 grandkids. All of us are working together, starting businesses and trying to figure out how do we do what God designed the family to really do. And there we have in the Bible a description of the design for the first family. I find this so helpful because whether or not you believe in the Bible or not, it is really important to try to tether your philosophy of family to something that is ancient and something that actually works. And so in the very first page of the Bible, we're given the mission statement for the very first family. And I find that incredibly useful. And the what God says in Genesis 1 about the family after he creates man and woman and tells them, he says he blesses them and blesses them to be fruitful, multiply, fill, subdue, and rule over creation. And so this 5-part mission statement is our 100-year vision for our family. We want to create the kind of family who is fruitful, multiply, fill, subdues, and rules. Now, in that, you have you can reverse engineer what the family is just from that mission. Like in any mission, you can look at the mission to win the Super Bowl and reverse engineer the mission of a football team or how a football team should or could best be constructed. In the same way, you can do the same thing with a family. I mean, we know that in order for you to fill the earth, you have to be multi-generational. The first family was multi-generational. It was a team because God told them to do these 5 things, and we know that they were a generational team on mission because God gave them 5-part mission. And so, what does fruitful mean? It means to have children. What does multiply mean? It means to have grandchildren or have raised children in such a way that they would like to raise or have children. So that's a huge part of the mission of the family. Then we are to fill the earth. So part of it is that we are to expand territorially, and then to subdue. And this is really getting control of nature. It also could mean expanding our influence. This is like building businesses, buying businesses, like being a part, sort of a productive part of society in such a way that there's a constant encroachment of nature. And so whatever kind of business you start, it's all about trying to create solutions to all those kinds of problems. That's the entrepreneurial challenge. And so that's really the word subdue is all kind of is really about that. And that's a part of our vision. And then finally, it's to rule or govern, right? Eventually, as you are doing this filling, subduing, and ruling, there needs to be an understanding of how to provide governance that is wise and just. And so this is the mission given to the family. And so our 100-year vision is all about like in every generation trying to increase our movement through this 5-part mission to be fruitful in our generation, have 5 kids, to multiply in this generation. Our kids, we would love to see 25 grandchildren come out of the Gen 2. And so we have 25 in Gen 3. And then we want to be doing, and we're moving a lot of our resources as a family into this sort of next stage to fill. Like we are very geographically oriented as a family. We're all on one street. We're working to sort of to expand on in this place. Then we want to be subduing, which is starting businesses, like really understanding how every person is wired in the family and how this team works together. And as different people come into the family, whether they be children or in-laws, like what does it look like for us to take control of different elements that will bless our town, bless our city, and so that's the sort of subduing portion. And then ultimately, we'd love to see us get to a place of wisdom as a family that we can provide governance in the church, governance in the city, and just see how God does that. And this is a lot of I think the blessing of governance oftentimes disproportionately comes from multi-generational families. They're a tiny percentage of the American population, but they're an overwhelming percentage of the people in positions of high governance, both in the corporate world and in the political world.
On that point, I've heard you talk about the Kennedy family before. What can we learn from this concept of a ruling family and maybe that example of the Kennedy family?
Yeah, they are interesting. Joseph Kennedy was about the third richest man in America, and so once you have that wealth, he kept bumping into this problem, which was he kept realizing how much his ability to influence what he really wanted to influence in society and the world was being hampered in the political realm. And so he became increasingly political as he got older. And with his 9 children, he told them all, hey guys, your generation has a very specific mandate. And so he was very patriarchal and said, we want to, in your generation, get control of the presidency. And so this was his ambition. And he was obsessed with power. And so I don't condone Joseph Kennedy's values or morals, but I think that he does provide a really interesting example of multi generational vision. And so he was very clear with his kids, like if you want my attention as you're getting older as adults, then you need to join in this mission, and it's going to be highly political. And so you had 3 of his sons all ran to become president of the United States. And one of the surprising parts of that story is that Joe Jr., who was considered the shining star of the family, the one that was most likely to be president, was killed in World War II in a plane crash. And so after he was killed, the kind of jokester of the family, who was the second boy, Jack, he was the next in line. And so his dad was like, "All right, it's on you now, son." And so, of course, we all know he became one of the most famous presidents in American history. And Bobby Kennedy, which was the next boy in line, was on his way to become president when he was assassinated. And then Teddy Kennedy also became, I think, the longest serving member of the Senate, the Lion of the Senate, he was called, and he also ran for president. And because he, wasn't the most wise member of the Kennedy family, he had some problems that really precluded him from being able to win the presidency. But that's quite a shocking description of the power of a patriarchal vision. I'm just like completely blown away that a father could make a decision like that. We're going to gain control of the presidency in your generation and successfully lead his family despite the unbelievable obstacles that family faced. That they were actually able to accomplish that vision.
Patriarch seems like a naughty word these days, a bad word.
Yes.
What does it mean? What do you mean by it?
Yeah. So a patriarch is a ruling father, basically a visionary father. That's the way to think of it. And it's highly unfortunate that we are now living in a day and age where men and women are, for political reasons, really trained to go to war against each other. And when you do that, a really easy way for feminists to sort of gain an upper hand is to denigrate the idea of the patriarch. And we've invented a new word in the last 100 years, patriarchy. That's actually not an ancient word. It's a very new word. If you look it up on Google, it sort of appeared in the early 20th century. But the word patriarch is a very ancient word. And the patriarch was a necessary role within a family if the family was ever going to survive. Again, I think that we oftentimes have a really distorted picture of the past. Like men were, just constantly sitting on couches drinking beer while their wives, were busy cleaning and serving them. And that's not at all what happened in ancient times. Men and women, husbands and wives, were in a fight for their survival, and a fight against poverty, against sickness, against war, against slavery. And it was a pitched fight. And the primary variable as to whether or not your family was going to fall into some horrific set of circumstances was the strength and the vision and the character of their patriarch. And so that's the way it was historically. Now, it's not necessarily true today because, again, we've basically made the state the patriarch, and most women, they will pledge allegiance to that patriarch if they choose not to have a husband. A patriarch maybe that is the corporation, a patriarch that is a government, a patriarch that is a university, some large institution is itself a form of patriarch. And so there is no escaping having this sort of a structure that's being led by a visionary leader. In the family, you can have structures that are led by female visionary leaders today, and I think that's fine. But the family has a particular design where the husband and the wife play a particular kind of set of roles in order to create the ideal team that exists for all of the elements that need to create the family. And this team has a sort of a prescriptive design that's very difficult to alter. So if you, for example, make the wife the primary breadwinner and you have the husband the primary nurturer, there are a lot of challenges that are created by that structure, particularly if you are in a survival situation. You can get away with that today for a little while. You have a sort of very difficulties that sociologists are whether they're believing in Christianity or not, they're really coming against this because it's so fragile. Usually the first casualty of having sort of a upside down set of roles is the fact that the wives tend to lose any attraction for their husbands when there is an inversion of roles. And that's a disaster. But that's just the beginning. We can get deeper and deeper and deeper into the problems. Again, this is how we double down on our experiments. It's like we have an experiment that isn't working, and then we try to double down, and we tend to continue to go the wrong direction and make the experiment, worse and worse. And Margaret Thatcher, who was the first female prime minister of the United Kingdom, she famously said in the '80s, she said, "Look, I ruled, the UK during the day, and when I come home, I want to be a wife." And everyone knew what she meant by that. It was okay for her to experience, a world, that was really, uh, cater to her strengths in the workplace while coming home and playing a role. And this role is a enormous violation of our obsession in the West with individualism. How dare anyone tell me that there's a prescriptive role? And look, I think there are elements of the role of father and husband that I'm wired and I enjoy and I personally resonate with. There's a number of the elements of that role that are really hard for me to do, and I don't enjoy. And so if I am obsessed with my individual freedom, I'm going to resent and resist all of those elements of that role. But there's way too much at stake for me to do that. I'm on a team, and my kids and my grandchildren need me to do a really good job playing this role. My wife and everyone else in the family, we are hyper dependent on one another. And so I think instead of constantly attacking these roles because we are worshiping this idol of individualism and individual self-expression, we need to say, look, again, if you come up with some novel way of constructing the family that is that is creating enormous thriving for children and for men and women, then I think that we should at least take a look at that model. But if you're attempting a model that is wreaking havoc on men, women, and children, then we need to have a little humility and respect the thousands of years of tradition and history that we understand, and even our own biology, and say there are things that we need to actually submit to, within the family and within these roles themselves. And I find that when you make that shift, you end up constructing a family that is far more likely to thrive. But again, a prerequisite in our culture is that it has to come at the free consent of the individual, and their primary way of evaluating what they will consent to is whether or not it appeals to their individual preferences, and that's the highest value in the hierarchy chain of Western values, and it'll never work if you think along those lines. That's just a philosophical, um, conviction that will destroy the family every time. And so that's really what we're up against, something that I think is really hard to overcome because we have this assumption that that's the way that we need to think about our lives, our values. We have to think about them as these free individuals. And yeah, this is a deeply confused way of understanding how that collides with a family, and which should win. And if you're going to have children, you're gonna need to construct a family, that's going to require some sacrifices on your part, and that's okay. It's worth it, if you're choosing to have children and raise a family.
To that point, what has it looked like for you? Like with like the elements for you that have been challenging to accept or submit to? And I'm sure there's listeners that will be able to resonate with that, whether it's those particular things or other things, and how have you worked through that?
If you look at my personality profile, I would say it's sort of like fits in the realm of like the absent-minded professor. Like that's if you let me just go the way I want, I will be like studying things obsessively. I will forget like lots of my responsibilities. I will be very emotionally unavailable. There's so many elements of my personality that when I just sort of like indulge my preferences to the nth degree, I find myself doing a lot of the things that you would find like in that kind of realm. And so yeah, there's all kinds of elements to that that just aren't very cohesive or aren't very adaptive to family life. Like I can't just sit and obsess over some micro problem and go deeper and deeper into it. I've got to like pay attention to my kids, understand what's on their hearts, what's in their minds, what they're interested in. And I'm leading a family. Like there are rhythms that I think should happen like on a regular basis. And so to sacrifice all of those things, I'm leading that team. So oftentimes I'll bump into dads. This is very common where I'm just like, I can tell like they're almost wired to be like the football coach. And I'm always like, that's almost the perfect wiring for a father. And I'm very different than that. And so I often have to learn from those kinds of dads elements of fatherhood. And some people listening to this might say, no, there is no such thing as yes, there is an ideal. This is something that's really confusing for people in the West. Children and families have irreducible needs. There are things that they need. And as an absent-minded professor, there are all kinds of elements that my family needs that don't really fit well into that profile. You can say, no, Jeremy, you can just build some other kind of business or some other kind of family. Like I would never have had 5 children as an absent-minded professor if I was indulging. That's just too many kids. There's oftentimes, you can imagine just like, get out of my study, let me do my thing. There's even connecting with my wife. I think that personality can be really tough on a marriage, right? And so I'm constantly thinking about, okay, what are elements that I need to like dampen in my personality that are causing me to not like I had a friend who had a very similar personality to me, and he would literally take off for 6 weeks and never text his wife, never call his wife. He's like, God made me this way. I'm like, dude, God made me this way too. I would never do that. She's got needs. Like your preferences and your wiring is one variable. And it's a variable that needs to be considered. Like, how do you use your strengths in your family to maximize your family? But there are elements of weaknesses that are coming with your wiring that are really hard on your wife and really hard on your kids. And so I've had to develop a lot of systems that overcome my natural weaknesses as a father and as a husband. And sometimes I'm good at that. Sometimes I'm not good at that. But yeah, this sort of like template that go deep inside yourself, discover your preferences in your wiring, and then just live out of your authentic self. Like that is a death knell to most families. Like you can't just do that. And again, you see this in any other context. If you were to go on a sports team and say to, like you're trying to compete and somebody who's like the running back or, the lineman or the linebacker say to them, "Hey, just do whatever you feel just naturally comes out of you." No, there's a coach there who's like, "Yeah, you got some raw talent. We're going to work with that. But there's some stuff like you got to learn. There's skills you got to learn. It's okay to have those things in the family. It's okay to realize as a woman there are elements of this job as wife and mother that feel like dying, and it's really hard for me to learn these things, and they're not comfortable for me. Yes, 100%. We should have empathy for that. But one of the things we can't do is then say, "So just, like, lean deeper into that, and even if your husband and your kids are suffering, like, that's okay. Like, just be more authentically who you are, and that'll just magically make everything better." That's not reality. Like, and that's again why I think the conversation around roles in teams is really important. If you realize that you are holding a position within a team, then if you take a big step back and understand what the team is trying to do, like what the team is trying to accomplish, what the team is designed for, what these roles really require from each person, then and submitting to those roles and learning the skills that those roles entail, like all of that makes complete sense if you're on a team. And again, it's not easy. We should have empathy for the challenges, but what we can't have empathy for is the wholesale rejection of the design itself, the wholesale rejection of the role itself. The idea that the irreducible needs of the family and the children should always come be at the expense of whatever my preferences are as an individual. Like that is a yeah that is a devastating philosophy for the family. And we can see the results. It's not good. It's interesting to me to think about layers of what children need, right? And I think they need different things at different stages of development. I think that the first thing a child needs is a sense of peace and strength emanating from their father. Like the moment that infant is born, put it in the arms of a strong father and let them feel that father's peace. Like you are cared for. there's a kind of comfort that comes over an infant when they're held by a strong father. I think that a mother has a different kind of peace that she gives. And then as that child's getting older, toddler, the toddler needs to sense that we are not orbiting my vision, but I am being led by my father. And so there's a sense in that stage where a father needs to train that toddler and that young son or daughter, like, no, you are a part of a team and I am leading this team. I think there's nothing more terrifying, destabilizing as an infant or as a toddler or a young child than to realize or think that somehow I'm in charge, like, as a child. Like, that is not going to bring peace in the home. And so the father needs to, lovingly and consistently train that child how to exist within his ecosystem that he's creating. And this is, I think, gonna bring a lot of peace and harmony in the home, but also I think it causes the child to sort of downshift into like, wow, like I'm a part of something bigger. If you've ever been a part of like a team that's doing something, there's kind of like, wow, I can't wait that I get to be a part of this. And so a father's got to put that kind of umbrella over that family, and that child needs to sense that, and then he starts to train that child to be a real contributing member of that team. And I think that that's a very exciting place for a child to experience. And then as you get into like differentiation, right? Adolescence, teenage, I think that there is an innate part in every son or daughter where they desperately want to please their father. And today, most sons and daughters are deeply wounded in that relationship because the father doesn't really know the heart of that son or daughter. And he's actually using them to get his preferences met. The wife and the mother, sometimes she's doing the same thing. And so eventually, if you come to that conclusion as a as a teenager, when you go through differentiation where you're saying, who am I and how am I a part of this thing? I'm not just a part of the I'm also an individual. In that stage, you need to make sure that that father wound doesn't get isn't created in that son or daughter, and say, "Look, I love you. I care about you. I know you. I see you." And when they sense that, this like teenage rebellion that I think is inevitable in differentiation, when there's a realization that I'm probably being used to satisfy the preference instead of like, "Wow, dad is sacrificing first and sacrificing most for this larger family, and I get to be a part of that process, and he's listening and understands me and how I fit in that." So there's it's almost like a recruitment onto the team where the child must voluntarily decide and I think that they desire to give their family, their father that place. But again, I think that is often used against them. And once that happens, wow, is that damaging to a child at that stage. So we have to be very thoughtful during that stage. And then I think the real team like ness of what an adult child needs from his father, that actually ramps up when they become an adult. That's the moment when I get most excited. So our kids, we really encourage them to spend time, on other teams, like from 18 to until they got married. Because this was the one time that they had an opportunity to really experience that and to expand the family. And so we were often going to where they were, uh, what they were learning, networks and communities they were becoming a part of. But then, of course, when they get married, start having children, and we experience this, now our three married adult kids. It's like we're all working together, and this is the part of multi-generational family life that most people never get to experience. Where as the dad, like they're not submitting to my authority, like they are leading independent branches of the family. We are highly coordinated, and they trust me because I've spent my whole life like loving them and and really working with them, and I know them better than anyone. So for them to be a part of sort of a larger organization that I get to lead and that they get to be fully participating in, that's kind of what we're experiencing now, which has been super super encouraging and fun. But again, in our culture, that was very normal in most cultures and most times in history. But yeah, at that point, that's when the sort of visionary leadership skill of the father is absolutely critical, right? When you're leading your sons and son-in-laws, towards bigger and bigger things that they're excited about. They're again voluntarily choosing to be participate in, and that's I think that there's a whole element of fatherhood that Abraham really demonstrates in his relationship with Isaac that I just don't see. It's been really hard to find templates for that because we have disrupted that season of fatherhood so much and just hit the reset button and say, okay, let's just start over. And everyone kind of, starts from scratch. Um, how do you actually build in Gen 2, Gen 3, Gen 4? What does it mean to be those generations as opposed to everyone's a Gen 1 and in order to maximize sort of individual self expression? Um, yeah, there's lots of unhealthy ways to do this, but I do believe there's some remarkably healthy ways that we can discover, that are really integral as a part of the way that God designed family.
It's such a foreign concept these days for anyone, I would say under the age of 45, 50, to think about being a grandparent and what it means to be a grandparent and what that will look like one day to be a grandparent or a great grandparent. So just to hear that, like, this is such a modern phenomena that we're so trapped in this. We reset every 80 years. We reset, and there's a new family, and you launch out versus this multi-generational, multi-hundred-year plus vision for your family. So one of the mantras that has always stuck with me from what I've heard from you, Jeremy, is one of the most important jobs that I have as a dad is to win my kids' hearts, and it's to give them
Mhm.
identity, is to cast vision, give them that sense of purpose. I think you mentioned this some before, but every organization, every good organization has mission, vision, values. You were a very successful CEO. I'm sure you helped build those for your organization. A lot of the listeners here, a lot of the viewers probably have contributed to identifying those within their organizations. I saw a stat where less than 10% of families have any sort of mission, vision, values.
Yeah.
Is that a big deal?
Yeah, I would say that that's the mission, vision, and values is one of the key tools in the hands of a visionary leader. And we've discovered that this is important, right? Any team, any company, any family that wants to cause a group of people to work together, coordinated, that are going to be instilled with a similar direction and aim, a similar compass, articulating that is really important. And I think that one of the reasons why men love sports is that the mission is so clear. Like, I think it's a reason also why I think men love to study war. It's like so clear. Take Berlin, win the Super Bowl. It's sort of intoxicating to be a part of a team when the goal is so clear. I know when I've hit it. I know when I've scored. And so one of the problems with family is that people like, what game are we playing? Like, when did I score? Like, when do I get to spike the ball? Um, and so I think that articulating the mission, and the vision can really be helpful so that we give our families, this sense of like progress. Like we are moving towards this thing. And that's the essence of, what a visionary leader has to do. You have to see this future and then begin to lead people towards that place, and that's the compass point. So, I there's various tools. Like, of course, do you have to write vision, and values for your family? No, but my question is gonna be, how are you gonna overcome the confusion that your family is naturally feeling right now about where they're headed? Like, you've gotta figure out how to solve that problem, and every company has this problem, and the tool that we've used to overcome that is to take a step back and begin to articulate a clear mission, vision, and values. So I think it's a really useful tool. I think we should consider doing that, for our families. Now, one of the things that I, uh, I think is important to add is that the family does have a pre-existing kind of preloaded mission statement. In other words, we didn't design this thing. We're not leading a corporation that we went to the state and, filed, for to become like an LLC. Like the family was started first, and God gave us this five-part mission I talked about earlier, right? To be fruitful, multiply, fill, subdue, and rule. And I think there's a lot of content in that mission that we need to consider. And then, of course, Jesus gave this mission to go be, to be fruitful, multiply, fill, subdue, and rule when he gave the Great Commission to go make disciple makers. And to fill the earth and reach all the nations. And this whole we call the Great Commission is just a repackaging of Genesis 1:28 of this 5-part family mission. So I think that if you're like, I don't know if I have a great mission. I don't know if I could come up with a vision for my family. Well, if you're a Christian, there are some really specific mission given to the family in the Bible that I am very inspired by, and our family finds really helpful. So we've really adopted those that language in a lot of cases. But there's also, I think, unique assignments, unique family cultures, unique family missions, unique family values. I think where values get really interesting is the reason why people in companies will articulate their core values is there's something in already the DNA of this business that we want to make sure is enhanced and remains a part of this because it's really serving our clients, our customers really well, our product. It's serving our teams and our employees. It helps us kind of become it really is culture creating. And we want to preserve what the best parts of our culture. And if you look at a family and spend like a weekend with a family, there are things that are unique, what it's like to be that family. And every kid can bring new and interesting, elements into that. So why not articulate those things and say, yeah, we're going to double down on some of those really cool elements of what it means to be this kind of a family. And that's one of the things I think would be so fun is just to see families just create their own, really unique culture that we can celebrate and experience, and you can start to see the grand diversity that could exist between families.
Agreed. Let me wrap with this question, Jeremy. A father listening to this interview and they're objectively been crushing it in their career, in their work life, their business, whatever it is. But they're realizing after kind of hearing some of this stuff, wow, I'm a present dad, but I have been passive when it comes to really being this kind of visionary leader. I've been passive when it comes to intentionally winning my kids' hearts and giving them identity and casting vision for them. How would you coach them?
I always start with their own identity as a father. Do you inhabit that identity, and or has it been kind of crushed or squeezed out by these other identities? And when you go to work, do you see yourself primarily as a father who is leading a family and your family's sending you off to work in order for you to gain resources, connections, skills for the family and bring them back? Or are you switching teams and going and being a part of another team and adopting a completely different identity? And that identity is actually more primary. Anyone who's doing that move, I think, is not never going to really feel comfortable in their own family because they're basically going to say, I feel more comfortable in this role that I'm a part of at work. And so I think that you have to start by saying, I am a father. This is my primary team. I'm not going to switch teams. I am going to see myself as the leader of this team, and I'm going to take my team um, as far as I possibly can using every skill and every advantage that I have. And that's how I'm going to really evaluate. Now, a wife will love to be a part of a team like that. Most wives are like, yes, like that's why women want to get married and bond with men. It's like they want to be brought on an adventure with their husbands, like to build something that's meaningful. And so I think that can really revolutionize a marriage. It can really capture the hearts of your children and cause them to say, "Wow, he cares about this." And I want to be a part of what dad's building. Like this is so cool. And so I
Right.
think I think one of the things that I always wanna be careful of is there are so many messages that are trying to tell dads, "Be more present, love your kids more." But as I traveled into different countries, I've discovered that the most active fathers in different cultures don't, they're not primarily trying to do their duty grudgingly, like, "Oh, yeah, that's right, I forgot, I've gotta be a better dad." Like, they love being a dad because being a dad has been framed in a way that makes sense of who they are as a man. And their excitement comes oftentimes in those cultures from how their grandfather loved being a father and their father loved being a father, and that they both could not wait for their son to be someday to become a father. And he's so excited. And so it's just like they just feel like, yeah, this is totally natural. This is the most amazing thing. But most of us in our culture, we were raised in maybe more of a Western place where we saw our dad become obsessed with work. And so we're maybe the first generation to really think about fatherhood as being sort of central to our identity. And that's going to be a tough transition. Like there's not an easy way to make that shift. And so yeah, have a lot of grace for yourself. But I think that that's the shift you need to make. It needs to come from your identity. You have to fall in love with this role and all that it means. And I think from there'll be natural things that will start to kind of bubble up out of you that are going to be so sort of native to how God's designed you to be. And that's the stuff that really will cause you to both fall in love with fatherhood and will cause your team to rally around you.
For anybody who wants to learn more about these concepts, go deeper, learn more about you and the work you're doing, where should they go?
Yeah, a lot of this stuff is over at familyteams.com. So I help lead um, that entity. It's like really we try to coach fathers and mothers, and there's a lot of information there. There's a podcast there. We're on all the socials. So yeah, would love for you guys to check out what we're doing over there. And like yeah, this could be a tough transition. So we'd love to like help you guys get content around this. I wrote a book called Family Revision. Our partner at Family Teams, Jeff Bethke, he wrote a book called Take Back Your Family. And so sometimes I think if this feels like a very unusual paradigm shift that you want some time to really think about, think about either philosophically or theologically or sociologically, I would get those books. They're on Audible as well, and just take some time to think about these concepts. I think that can be super helpful in any kind of transition.
You've had such an impact on my growth as a dad, as a leader, and deepening my walk with the Lord, Jeremy. And it's just been an absolute honor to be able to have you on the show. Thanks for getting here.
Awesome. Yeah. Thanks, Blake. Love being here with you.